Welcome to the Essentially You podcast. Cynthia, honey, how are you doing today, girl?
I'm doing great. I've been so looking forward to connecting with you today.
Me too. Oh, I am so excited for our conversation today. I am ever the more excited about your book that I read cover to cover, girl. And I have it here, right here. Do you want to hold it up yourself? So we both hold it up. As it's not even out yet when we're recording this, but when this goes live, it will be out. Intermittent Fasting Transformation. I love it. The IF45 plan. And you know what? You speak to all of us. You speak to me. You speak to my community. You speak to women. You have got it dialed, because what you and I both know is women are not small men.
That's right.
And and that is what this book is about, is like, how can we make this work for us? And so we're going to be talking about intermittent fasting. I know a lot of people have been hearing a bit about it. Some people are trying it. Some people are trying to figure it out. Cynthia, honey, what was the impetus for you for this becoming such a big purpose for you?
I think really, the honest answer is,
Mm-hmm.
even though I'm a nurse practitioner, even though I have a great relationship with my mom, with my GYN, with my girlfriends, nothing prepared me for perimenopause, the 5 to 10 years preceding menopause. And I hit perimenopause like a wall. Like I was doing all the wrong things. I was exercising too hard. I was not getting enough sleep. I had a super stressful job working for a very large cardiology practice. My husband traveled a lot. I had 2 young kids. And I just got to a point where I literally was like, what is wrong with me? I was gaining weight. I couldn't sleep. I was exhausted all the time. I was developing food sensitivities. And so in many ways, I think fasting was a strategy that I was curious about. And I read a book by Jason Fung, and that gave me the courage to actually believe that this was a real entity, that this was something that had some scientific backing. And obviously, a lot of people were getting great results from it. And within probably 3 to 5 days of starting the intermittent fast, I felt so much better. I had more mental clarity. I started to sleep better. I think a lot of women come to intermittent fasting out of a desire to change body composition or lose weight. And let's be clear, that was part of my curiosity about it.
For sure.
But we stay for all the other benefits. And so that's how that started. And unknowingly, not realizing that me and my N of one would then trickle down to, I literally, this bled into the work I was doing with patients and clients, because at that point I already had a kind of like a solo gig on the side outside of my nurse practitioner job. And for me, I started seeing more and more connections, more and more things about different strategies I would use, different styles of fasting. What were the things that help women make it easier? And then the acknowledgement that, we have to fast differently. Like we feel on so many levels as women, we have to apologize for our biology. We have to apologize for our physiology. And I would actually encourage women to lean into it and to stop apologizing. And as you said, we are not many men, but we are wonderfully different than men, wonderfully and beautifully different than men. And if we lean into our physiology, it makes fasting a whole lot more accessible. And irrespective of where we are in life stage, like women that are still at peak fertile years versus perimenopause versus menopause, and not really looking at it as something that you just do temporarily. It's oftentimes something women can do throughout their lifetime. There are obviously specific times when they shouldn't. But for me, I feel like it's a tremendously powerful way for women to take back some control. There's so many things we can't control right now, but I feel like this is a strategy that women can use to their hormonal advantage.
I love that so much. Let's talk a little bit about, because I know for the most part, a lot of my community is after 35,
Mm-hmm.
and they're starting to feel the feelings of perimenopause, and things are shifting and changing. Definitely the weight is a concern, sleep is a
Mm-hmm.
concern, lack of energy is a concern. A lot of times women are just like, how do I navigate? Like you said, a lot of perimenopause hits a lot of us like a brick wall.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about intermittent fasting, I know, clearly our hormones are changing on the
Yep.
daily. They're definitely changing throughout the month. So I would love to break down so that, more the kind of the nitty gritty of what does it look like for women to intermittent fast when they are at like peak fertile years, where their cycle is running like a fine-tuned
Mm-hmm.
machine. And then what does that look like as we kind of saunter into that transition of perimenopause? And then I would love to even look at menopause as well, where women really feel at times stuck. And so that's what I would love to kind of tackle in the beginning, just so, because I know so many of my listeners have daughters or are definitely in their early 30s, you know, where we have women in our community that are of every age.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really important for us to understand that ultimately, before the age of 35, when we're at peak fertile years, even if we are choosing not to have a child, our bodies are conditioned to really be very attuned to stress from the environment and internal stress, nutrition cues, et cetera. And so we're exquisitely sensitive to those cues. And so a lean, peak fertile years woman may be able to fast for perhaps 1 or 2 days a week, or just do digestive rest, which is 12 hours of not eating, which could go from dinner to breakfast the following morning. And really leaning into the fact that the first 2 weeks of your menstrual cycle, if you have a 28-day, 30-day cycle, when estrogen is predominating, and so obviously I'm oversimplifying things, when estrogen predominates, we are in our superpower. We can push our workouts, we can push that fasting lever, we can allow for more hormetic stress, beneficial stress in the right amount. But as fertile women get closer to getting their menstrual cycle, the 5 to 7 days preceding, that's the time to back off a bit, really either not fasting at all or just doing that digestive rest, that 12 to 13 hours, because our brains, in response to changing fasting and feeding windows, are very, very attuned to the feast famine cycle. And so I remind women that even if they're choosing not to have children at that point in their lives, their bodies are very attuned to food scarcity. And so when you're first starting to fast, if the first month or two your schedule is a little bit wonky, I don't worry about that. But a sign that intermittent fasting is not working for you, if you're at this life stage, is if your cycle goes away and you're not pregnant. That's like an number one rule. And so I like to use the menstrual cycle as a barometer of whether or not fasting is working well for you. So that's under age 35. Obviously, if you're a woman under age 35 who has weight to lose, you can push that fasting lever a little bit. It really depends on, maybe you're doing it every other day, really remaining attuned to how you feel and where you are in your menstrual cycle. Perimenopause and menopause is a whole other playing field. And this is a time, I always say, it's the litmus test. If you're taking care of yourself, you're going to breeze through perimenopause. If you are, not eating the right foods,
if you were taking care of yourself before as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, exactly. So I always say, like, what I did in my 20s and 30s was fine. But once I hit 40-ish, all of a sudden I couldn't exercise at the same intensity. That didn't mean that I wasn't working hard. I just couldn't do like CrossFit type exercises. It was too much, combined with not enough sleep, combined with, eating inflammatory foods. Like gluten and dairy were fine for me when I was younger, did not work for me in my 40s. And so I think it's really important to understand that the lifestyle piece becomes much more important in middle age. So how much you sleep, high quality sleep, anti-inflammatory nutrition, stress management, and that is not 2 minutes of meditation. That means you actually legitimately need to lean into that. The right types of exercise at the right time. So a perimenopausal woman may start experiencing sleep disturbances, may start experiencing heavier menstrual cycles. And a lot of this is a byproduct of our progesterone levels are starting to falter. Our eggs are as old as we are. So if you're 40, your eggs are 40 years old. And so not every month, even though you may get a cycle, you may not be ovulating every month. Your body is starting to your fertility is starting to unwind a bit. Yes, many women still get pregnant in their 40s. I'm not saying that isn't possible, but it's important to understand the physiology. So if estrogen and progesterone are not properly balanced, this is also women have, I used to call them the crime scene periods. I used to pray I wouldn't start my menstrual cycle when I was running in the hospital, because it was so heavy. It was nearly unmanageable. But you start getting heavier menstrual cycles, the weight gain, the breast tenderness, just feeling cranky, the lack of sleep. Sometimes people just feel like they have significant mood disorders. They're depressed, they're anxious, they can't figure out why. And so really understanding what's going on with the body. Again, the same thing applies. First 2 weeks of your menstrual cycle, from the day you start bleeding until before ovulation, you can push that fasting window. And this is a time when it may be very beneficial as women are starting to enter perimenopause. Maybe you are fasting every day, but it could be 12 hours one day, it could be 15 the next, it could be 16 the next day, really kind of leaning into what is working well for your body. What's your energy like? What's your sleep patterns like? What are you eating? Are you eating nutrient dense foods, or you're eating highly processed foods, which can create further imbalances. And so for a lot of women, as they're navigating this, they kind of have these check-in points. And I use sleep as a barometer. I always say, if you can't sleep through the night, don't add in fasting. I use cravings as a barometer to kind of get a sense for, are you giving your body nutrient dense whole foods? Are you eating too many carbs? Here's another thing that kind of stinks about middle age is we become more insulin resistant as
yes,
we have these.
Do.
Yep.
And we're more insulin resistant in those 7 days leading up to our cycle, right? And that is a time, this is why it's so fascinating. You know, that first part of the follicular phase, you're talking about period to ovulation. We have a higher pain tolerance. We have more stamina. We're less likely to fatigue. We are able to burn into those glycolytic reserves. We just have got more umph to push the envelope for intermittent fasting. Even if keto is the thing you're looking to do, like this is the time to stress the system. We move into that second phase, and that last week, it's so fascinating to me that when you are the most insulin resistant is when your body is the most concerned about feast or famine, you know, and it's interesting, that kind of advice to give women, to be like, so by the way, you are really insulin resistant right now, especially like double that up after 5 p.m., you know, but your body's going to want you to eat carbs, and you're just going to have to be really mindful around the type of carbs that you're consuming in that 7 days, day 21 to 28, however you land on that.
No, and I think it's helpful for women to understand, like, those PMS cravings are real. But you have to kind of lean into it. Like, I'd rather you have sweet potato or some squash or some low glycemic berries than eating like chocolate cake and
absolutely. Well,
and ice cream.
Yes. That blood sugar roller coaster, especially that time of the month. Oh my goodness. In perimenopause, double it up.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think for a lot of women, you know, healthcare professionals are not talking about this phase. Ironically, one time I had my yearly exam with my GYN, was the same day my menstrual cycle had started. And I remember telling her my cycle's really heavy. And so before she could say anything else, she said, I can help you. The options were synthetic hormones, an ablation, an IUD, or, oh, if you just want to get rid of this entirely, we'll just take your uterus out. And I was like, no, 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 and no.
Oh
and thinking about how many women I'm sure we both interact with on social media or in programs that we run that have been on IUDs, or they had an ablation and then they have no idea where they are in perimenopause or menopause for that matter. And it's
put on the pill. And then,
and
then at 56, they're still on it. And they're just like, I'm not supposed to be on this anymore. I'm like, I don't, or they don't know they're even in menopause.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, you've been in menopause.
Yeah.
You know, you're just having pill bleeds.
Yeah, exactly. And so we don't educate women about their bodies.
No.
We don't educate women about what to expect in perimenopause and menopause. In fact, I've had to have arguments with people that are reaching out to me for press opportunities. There's no post-menopause. You know, it's either you're perimenopausal, peak cycling, or you're menopause. Menopause is its own entity. It's not post-menopause. It's 12 months without a menstrual cycle. So even the lay public is not clear on what these times are in a woman's life. And I think on a lot of levels, like, perimenopause can be a wonderful time for a lot of women. I always say, if you are part of the minority now and you are insulin sensitive, metabolically flexible, you may not even get a lot of perimenopausal symptoms.
Nope.
Which I think is a beautiful thing. And I jokingly always say,
I just want to take a moment, Cynthia, and celebrate you real quick, because there are so few people that understand that that perimenopause in how it plays out for you is metabolically driven.
Yeah.
But it's always on the sex hormones, progesterone and estrogen, and not to say that they're not playing a big role, and they're having a big role in our metabolic health as well, and our metabolic flexibility. But I feel naturally these are meant to decline to some degree. I mean, they definitely are declining. You don't get that. This is going to happen to you. That's how it's going to go. But that decline was never supposed to be a Mack truck moment as much as I find that where those hormones really mess with us is when we don't have that metabolic flexibility. We don't have the insulin sensitivity. And what we know to be true is that only 12% of the population have good metabolic function to begin with.
Yep.
You put that against women in perimenopause, and that percentage is even lower.
Yeah. Well, and I think I can say personally, I never experienced a hot flash per se. I would say like I had a spark. I got a sensation of what it must be like. I think 2018 was the first time that happened. And I said to my husband, like, I've had patients tell me for years what a hot flash is like. So I think that I was getting like a micro mini hot flash. And I would get them if I was in too hot of an environment. It wasn't even necessarily blood sugar related. But I remind women, if we can keep your blood sugar well controlled, if we can make you maintain metabolic flexibility, you are not going to get them.
No.
And I find it really interesting. I would say like in my 40s, it was a whole process of eliminating things like gluten and dairy, and then ultimately alcohol during the pandemic. Cause I was like, I never really liked it. I didn't drink much. It's the only thing that gives me a hot flash, and it's not worth it. My sleep is so
no,
important.
your liver is like, take that.
Yeah.
Hot flash. Take that, night sweats.
Exactly.
Your liver's, I would say your liver is
bad.
the key to hot flashes too. And everything to do with sugar. But yeah, you drink a half a bottle and see what happens.
Yeah, no, I would have like one glass of wine or one martini and I would just be wrecked. And I said, it isn't that good.
It isn't. No, it is not good enough.
No,
to
not
have
enough to
this
mess up my sleep.
experience.
Yeah. So I think, when women are fearful of perimenopause, like I have women all the time, and I'm sure they just do too. They're like terrified of perimenopause. And I was like, you shouldn't be fearful of it. It really should be a wake up call to say, okay, like I'm either doing it right or I'm not. And I'm living proof that I'm on the other side now. And I can honestly say, like, I feel pretty darn good all the time. Like I kind of check in with my sleep quality. So the really cool thing about menopause is that all of a sudden we don't have these cycling hormones day to day, month to month, to the degree that we have when we're in our peak fertile years and perimenopause. So we can push the lever on fasting, provided that we are getting that sleep in, that we are not over exercising, that we're eating anti-inflammatory nutrition. We can really push the envelope just like men. So my menopausal women can fast every day. I'm not suggesting that people like do longer fasts every day, or they're just doing OMAD, which is one meal a day. But those are the women that can really run with it because they don't have to lean into all that sex hormone, circulating, issues. Now, this isn't to suggest women in menopause make their own form of estrogen called estrone. We still make progesterone predominantly from our adrenals. Our ovaries may be squeaking out a little bit. Depending if we're lucky, we may still have some circulating testosterone, but I find most people don't.
I find most women don't by 40.
Yep.
That has been
unbelievable.
My experience. Yeah. I just did a whole episode on that. It was just, that is, I would say, precipitously, testosterone is dropping as quickly as progesterone is.
Yep. And it's interesting because people are oftentimes surprised that yes, we do make testosterone, but it's so much more potent. So less testosterone can contribute to like weight gain around the abdomen. You can have trouble maintaining lean muscle mass or even actually building it. And, forget about the libido effects. I always say like stress impacts libido, impacts testosterone, but it's important for people to understand that we just have these it's just this precipitous kind of decline. What I find interesting, and I'm sure you probably see this as well, is like women who are not prepared after having a partial or a full hysterectomy that, you're going to wake up in the next day and you're going to feel like you got hit by a truck because your hormones, it was just this precipitous, it's like you got shoved off a cliff. I just interviewed a really well-regarded physician who's kind of a hormone expert. And he was saying, if this happened to men, they would never tolerate this. They would, be standing up and saying like, this should be the way things are. We should be educating ourselves about how to maintain, hormonal balance for as long as possible. And I think every woman has to decide for herself if you choose to use hormones, that you're not, shamed. And if you don't choose to use hormones, you shouldn't be shamed either. I think there's a lot of dogma. Obviously, a lot of it's not correct, but as women make that transition into menopause, I think fasting can be a whole lot easier, provided that they're sleeping. And I always say sleep is foundational to our health. And yet it's also one of these super unsexy topics that, the more I understand about sleep, the more humbled I am about how truly powerful and transformative it is. My mom was with me for about a week and we were tinkering with her melatonin and some other things. And it's really interesting how much like my generation, obviously your generation, we're helping change the narrative so that women have different experiences in middle age. They don't have to bareback it or just rough it out. Like my mom was saying, the Women's Health Initiative came out in 2002. And like everyone she knew got taken off their hormone replacement therapy. And so, I think as we learn more about what works for people, what doesn't work, just understanding that there are options, that you don't have to, there's no one size fits all. So
No.
for some people that may be the right decision, for others, it may not be. And that's okay. I always say there's no judgment.
No.
It's just understanding that there are options and
Oh,
figuring out
yeah.
what works best for you.
I'm all for pulling all the levers. I'm all for pulling all the levers. I think that sleep,
Mhm.
getting metabolically flexible, having insulin sensitivity, these are so critical.
Mhm.
But if we can leverage bioidentical hormones to get us to a better place of harmony in our body, then I am all for it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's for everybody, but why not use everything at our disposal
Yeah. Well, and
to boost brain function, to boost mitochondrial function, to have that longevity? Bring it
yeah.
on.
Well, and
That's my mindset.
no, and I think it's interesting. Like I had been very like, oh, I'm not going to do that. And I felt like a light went on. Like I think I'm cognitively very sharp, but I
Yeah,
felt like when
I
I
believe
first
you are
started
too.
taking progesterone and estradiol and testosterone, I felt like someone had turned a light back on. I was like, wow, I think because our hormones start declining in our mid to late 30s, but it's very slow. And I think a lot of us that have children at that time in our lives, like I was 34 with my first and 36 with my second, I just assumed it was because I had little kids. Like I always just wrote, I'm tired because I have little kids. I'm tired because I have a demanding job.
Well, it was that too.
Mm-hmm.
It was a combination. And then how do you it's probably the last thing at the back of your mind
Mm-hmm.
is you and the things that you got to do for you.
Totally.
You're chasing boys around.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think for anyone who's listening, it's just entertaining the possibility that there are options, figuring out for yourself, your N of one, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. I'm not someone who likes anyone to be fear mongered. And that's a source of endless frustration for me, because I certainly, even as a clinician, I got bad information. I think about, how, there's this one size fits all philosophy. And I'm like, listen, we are all individuals. I have some women in my practice who do beautifully with transdermal, skin absorbed options. I have other women that do horribly with those things and they need other options. And so I always think about, like, as you said, brain health. Like I read a book last year called The XX Brain that scared the crap out of me. I was like, we really need to be talking about the physiology of these sex hormones and how they impact cognition, because I don't know about y'all, but I want to be sharp as a tack till I go out. I definitely want to be one of these people who remains insulin sensitive, metabolically flexible, as healthy mitochondria as they can be. And one of many ways to do that is to really focus in on fasting as a strategy, even if you don't even think about the hormones, even if that's not the right piece for you. But I would say my progesterone is critically integrative in my sleep quality.
It's
and so
everything.
I joke about it.
I remember before the baby, and people talk about mom brain, and I was like, whatever. Like before the baby, I could do 10 interviews in a day, different topics, different whatever, and I could fire on all cylinders. 39, 30, 40 years old, and had Kingston. And my brain, it wasn't even during the pregnancy. It was after the baby was born. It's like someone just took my brain out of my head, like jumbled it up really good and tried to shove it back in there. And I had never known. I had the worst word recall. Like it was just gone. And I was just praying and hoping that I would never be on an interview where I was in the middle of a sentence and all of a sudden the word that I wanted just poof, just disappeared into the ethers. And I feel like right now I am finally barely coming out of that, because we co-sleep with Kingston, and I can't tell you how many times I breastfed. I don't even know how many snacks we had last night. It was, my husband was like, was he up a lot? I'm like, what do you even know about that? Like you were barely disturbed by it. And it's now it's more the lack of sleep. And finally hormones coming back online. But I was thinking to myself, like, if this is just a taste of what could happen to me in like a decade or so, I was, just really reminded me of how critical our hormones are to our ability to function neurologically, in terms of memory, word recall, alertness, focus, all of it. And so, I'm so glad we're having this conversation around even what is hormone, what do taking hormones look like later on,
Yeah.
just for the neurological benefit.
Yeah.
But again, every woman is different. I super,
Mm-hmm.
super love that is such a mindset for you. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that I'm really glad that we're having the conversation around perimenopause being, it can be such a really great journey.
Mm-hmm.
Just know it's that knowing that whether you like it or not, your body's going to change.
Yeah. And
And
I
you
think
just got to
it's,
decide you're going to get on the train and pivot with your body.
yeah. And I think on so many levels, and I mean, I'm certainly not perfect. I mean, I have days where I'm like, what in the hell is going on with my neck? Or where did my knees go? You know, what's going on? Because I had a big birthday last year, but overall, I'm really grateful for the fact
You
that
look
I've,
great.
oh, well, thank
Let's
you.
just call it out. You are
um,
obviously doing the work of what
yeah.
you are doing what you preach.
Yeah, no, thank you. But I think for each one of us, you know, between like filtered images on social media or just nonsense we see online, you know, unattainable, unrealistic expectations for what women are supposed to look like at any particular stage of life, whether it's postpartum, whether it's when you're a hot MILF and you're 40 or you're 50 or 60 or whatever. It's just the acknowledgement that we are going to change, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like I'm so grateful that I'm at a point in my life where wisdom wise, like I'm very self-assured. I know where I'm going. Of course, I have bad days. I mean, everyone does. But overall, I mean, I can think of maybe in the last 10 years, maybe 1 or 2 days where I had a little bit of like a mental like blip. And so it was clearly instrumental in one of those, you know, I'm definitely on the train for hormone replacement therapy because I was in between like transitioning from, I was working with one doctor, transition to another. And so I had to come off what I was on, my estrogen and my testosterone. And you can imagine like my body had been slowly petering off the estrogen and testosterone. And then I went back on. So it's like my body went back up and then I stopped and then it came crashing down. And I remember, this is kind of funny. I was heading to a mastermind event. I got on the plane. I got in the wrong seat, not once, but twice. I then got to my hotel and I got off on the wrong floor, not once, but twice. And so it scared the bejeebers out of me because that's so not me. And I remember I went back to my room and like, you know, reached out to one of my, you know, friends in the group and just said, clearly my brain needs estrogen because this is clearly an estrogen driven issue. But I think for everyone that's listening, the acknowledgement that you may have to, if you're taking hormones, you may have to kind of ebb and flow, like finding the right amount, finding the right route, finding the right doctor or provider to work with that can help honor you and your goals. Because I think that's so much of it is, if anyone wants you to do one size fits all, run, like literally run for the hills. And I've come to find there are obviously excellent male providers. I'm by no means knocking guys. I know I'm the only female in my whole house. However, when it comes to these kinds of issues, I find that women sometimes really understand, like either they've been through it or they're seeing a lot of their patients go through it. And then so they have a natural kind of inclination to want to be able to honor, you know, not only that your objectives, but also their own. So really spend time, you know, talking to your provider about what your goals are, what you want to do, and asking or ensuring that they're going to be able to honor what it is that you're asking for.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm on that train. I only have an all woman healing entourage. Women understand women. And again, not to knock that men haven't done their research and their studying, but we're different. There's a deep knowing, you know, it's just like once you've given birth to a baby, oh, you get it. Once you become a mama, oh, you get it. You know what I'm saying? But you, as a woman, you get it. So I definitely shout out to all the women doctors out there and practitioners and coaches, you know, who really get it. So I shout that out. And I agree in terms of, you know, just figuring out what the right thing is for you. And I think that the same thing falls in with intermittent fasting of like, what does that look like? You know, we do know a lot about how we can leverage intermittent fasting according to the barometer, the fifth vital sign, our menstrual cycle. But then also you got to just listen to your body and see how your body responds. That's going to be always key. But I think that's why I always tell people, track your cycle, because you,
Yeah.
you'll know more. I feel like once I started tracking my cycle, I just became more attuned
Yeah.
to what my body was telling me. Because like your mama, like as she said, gritting through it, pushing through it. That was just how I operated. I totally went against everything my body was saying, those 7 days leading up to my period. I'd always wonder why it was so much harder
Yeah.
to do the thing that I normally would do, a week prior, 2 weeks prior. And so I just was under the mindset of like, I just have to work harder during this
Yeah.
phase. And, to my detriment, I got chronic fatigue and a thyroid issue,
Yeah.
because of it. And so I think really paying attention to our bodies, especially if we're still cycling, you really listening and adapting to that
Yeah.
when it comes to
Absolutely.
intermittent fasting. Talk to me,
Absolutely.
Cynthia, about some of the benefits that you experience doing intermittent fasting. What do you see with your clients consistently? So I think a lot of women, they want to know kind of what they're going to experience, maybe after they try intermittent fasting for, like, let's say 45 days.
Yeah. Well, I think people are first and foremost, like, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. People are curious about
Yeah.
fasting because they want to change body composition, they want to lose
Yes.
weight, but they are surprised by how good they feel. They have this mental clarity. I've had women tell me they feel like a light bulb went on in their brain, which is so sad, because we've been conditioned, this dogmatic principles about, stoke your metabolism and eat every 2 to 3 hours. And breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And oh, by the way, eat dessert for breakfast because that's really going to serve your needs. So obviously with lowered fasting insulin levels, you're going to have improved mental clarity. You're going to have, as you become more fat adapted, you're going to break down ketones, and one particular one that diffuses across the blood-brain barrier is beta hydroxybutyrate. So people just say, I feel amazing, lots of energy, lots of mental clarity. We reduce inflammation. So maybe you're dealing with joint pain, maybe you're dealing with a sore muscle, maybe you've got chronic pain issues that all of a sudden, as you have a reduction in inflammation, as you have reduced oxidative stress, as you kind of tap into autophagy, which is this waste and recycling process in the body that is upregulated when we are not eating. Here's the key. It's when we're not eating that it's really upregulated. We get rid of disease, disordered organelles, mitochondria, things that don't belong. It's like taking out our body's garbage. The reduction in blood sugar, in insulin, our improved biophysical markers, blood pressure, total cholesterol, high triglycerides,
Yes,
HDL. And I remind people that, one thing for me that, my whole background as an NP for 16 years was in cardiology. And we start to talk about insulin resistance really permeates high blood pressure, the high triglycerides, the low HDL, like really understanding that these are all signs of a bigger problem, metabolic syndrome, metabolic inflexibility. I think about our reduction for certain types of neurocognitive disorders. Women are protected from a lot of brain health issues until we go through menopause, largely related to that sex hormones that are waxing and waning. So a reduction in neurocognitive issues, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. And then also there are specific reproductive cancers and even colorectal cancer, reduction in risk with fasting. So on a lot of levels, combined with things like just improved in the gut microbiome, how many of us have terrible gut health? Like we don't even realize, like there's this whole ugly word, it's called the estrobolome, but how women break down, detoxify, and get rid of estrogen. It helps with improving the epithelial layer of the small intestine. It can help with stem cell activation. It can be beneficial for, again, helping with detoxifying, breaking things down. And unfortunately, the word detox has gotten a really bad rap that it's this like woo-woo, I have to take 15 products. And I remind people that by the time we're middle-aged, for a lot of people, the cumulative net impact of things we're exposed to in the environment, personal care products, and food can, make that estrobolome, this estrogen-rich environment in the gut microbiome. It can really impact it in negative ways. So those are usually the things. The other thing that I would say, because this comes up often, is that women say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it wasn't normal I didn't realize that bloating was not normal. I didn't realize that my stomach could be this flat because you're not eating all day long. You're giving your body time to properly break down, detoxify, get rid of things that don't belong. And you're not doing this onslaught of food and sugary beverages all day long, which really overtaxes our digestive system. So those are usually the key points, but I would say it's really the mental clarity and the energy for a lot of people that is a bit of a surprise. The added benefit, and there's again, a lot of fear mongering around this, thyroid function, adrenal health, whether or not these are negatively impacted by fasting. And I always say, if you fast in the right amount at the right time, it can be hugely impactful, especially for thyroid issues. I myself have had an underactive thyroid, and I tell people that, what's one of the benefits of intermittent fasting is that we get improved mitochondrial efficiency. And that is because your body is getting rid of things that don't belong. So I do see a lot of improvement, but the caveat and the dovetail to what I'm saying is the exception is that if you're doing too much at the wrong time in the wrong amount. So if you are the week before your menstrual cycle and you're trying to fast, one meal a day and do prolonged fast, that's too much stress for the body. If you're going through a divorce, you're going through a big move, you're going through some major life stress event, maybe that's not the right time to add in another stressor. And so the acknowledgement that it's all about balance, but we're not taught to balance things in that way. We're taught like, oh, life's about balance, but it's really honoring what the cues our body is trying to communicate to us. Like I know for myself, as an example, I wear an Oura ring. And there are days I just don't get the same amount of sleep day to day. Although I'm in bed, maybe I'm not getting as much REM sleep or deep sleep. Those are not the days that I go to the gym and like do a heavy workout. Those are the days I'll go for a walk outside in nature. And so I think we really have to be honest with ourselves about where we are in time and space. And then, acknowledging that there are benefits for fasting that are not just related to changes in body composition, because that's what a lot of people come to out of curiosity, but there's so much more to it. It's just really scratching the surface.
I agree with all of that 100%. Like just kind of knowing. And I think that's why wearables are so wonderful too. I have a Whoop strap on, and I remember my husband wanting to get it for me. And I was like, I don't need a strap to tell me how little sleep I'm still getting. But what I love about it, like the Oura ring, is that it tells you how much recovery, how much heart rate variability, and what kind of room you've got for a workout. Is it a walking kind of day? Is it you get to pick up those heavy weights today? And so I think that those, I love wearables, and we don't all need a wearable to kind of know what's going on. You can just listen to your body. But wearables, I think are definitely very, very beneficial. And you're right. Intermittent fasting at the end of the day is a very healthy stressor, but it's a stressor. It's creating hormesis, like you talked about in the beginning. One of the reasons why I think the mitochondria loves intermittent fasting is they're just like, stress me out a little bit, And I think especially for us as women, because there's so much change and so much going on, in that, especially in the realm of perimenopause, that transition into menopause, you think about with that time in your life, Cynthia, where you were raising your boys, they were rambunctious and they were moving, your career was taking off, your husband was traveling. Like a lot of times, some of the biggest things in our life, some of the most important times of our life is in that transition. And your body is literally flipping on its head. You know what I'm saying? And so, just a lot of, I think grace is such a big part of that, and I think we can do intermittent fasting with a lot of grace as well, as long as we're in tuned. And I know for so many women, especially a lot of the high achieving women listening to this, is that you just want to push it and do it the hardest, and that's not always the best ever. For me, even with the intermittent fasting that I do, there are definitely days that it's just the 12 hours.
And that's okay. And I love that you bring up grace, because that's something I talk about a lot. And there's no shame if you need to take a break. There's no shame if you decide it's not working for you. And I do have women who will reach out to me that'll say, like, every time I try to fast, I don't feel good, or I really, really struggle. And I just say, well, take a break. You don't have to force it. And unfortunately, we've been conditioned, especially as you mentioned, high achieving women. We just have to try harder. We just have to push harder. We have to push through it. And that used to be my mentality. I was actually saying to my mom, who used to be a CIO of a huge medical system before she retired, I was like, I don't know how you worked for years and years and years, sleeping on 3 to 4 hours a night of sleep, because I will put myself to bed. Like my family knows, if I've had a really stressful day, I'll just go to bed early. So the work will always be there. And that's what I think a lot of people need to hear. And it was when I was a new nurse practitioner a long time ago, one of my favorite cardiologists used to say, Cynthia, like, just go home. The work will always be here. And so that's always,
and the work's at home too, Cynthia.
Exactly. It's always there. And I remind people that, focus on the 2 or 3 things you have to get done every day and let go of the rest, because perfectionism will destroy your life. If you have to have everything be perfect, everything has to be perfect, like you put that kind of pressure on yourself, it will like suck your soul out. I see far too many women, especially in their 40s, 50s and beyond, that really struggle with that. And so I was like, I gave up perfectionism a long time ago. It's like, it's not attainable. It's not healthy for me. Sometimes good is just as good as, getting it done. And so, I tell my mom, Italian mothers, they're very, kind of like in everything. And my mom said, you don't make the boys iron their Vineyard Vines t-shirts. And I said, no. I told them if they want to iron their t-shirts, they can do it, but I'm not doing it. So I was like, I just gave that up. When they were old enough to use an iron, I was like, as long as you look nice when you go to church or whatever holiday we're celebrating, that's all I care about. If you want to wear wrinkly clothes to school, that's your choice. You get to a point where it's just too much. So let that stuff go.
I love that so much. Well, I'm so excited. I know that the benefits for intermittent fasting are so great. I love that we touched upon menopause, where we are more physiologically kind of like men at that point in our life, right? And so that we can definitely kind of push intermittent fasting a little bit harder in that particular phase. And I think a lot of women who've come onto the other side and are in menopause are like, whoa, gosh, the roller coaster was perimenopause. Why didn't anyone tell me that that was going to be the roller coaster? Why does everyone keep telling me that it's menopause? No, menopause where things ease up. Yeah, dialing in, figuring out what the right things are for you in menopause. But it's great. It's like, if you need bioidenticals, what does that look like for you? But this is a lot of my audience as well, is like, this is where you can actually kind of, put the pedal to the metal when it comes to IF and kind of figure out that sweet spot for you in menopause. And there's a lot of where women are struggling with the weight piece. They're struggling with a lot of those other pieces where this could really be beneficial. And what I love so much about the book, because as I mentioned, I read it all the way through, girl. I love a good plan. I love good recipes. I love what you've done with all of this. And we actually made one of your recipes this week.
Oh, yay.
It was the salmon one. Because oh my God, I love salmon so much. One of my favorite fish. And I'm obsessed with broccoli. My little baby eats broccoli too. So we did the sheet pan salmon with broccoli and the lemon pepper butter. Oh, so yummy. Because I was like, oh, we need to do that. Like, that was such a great reminder. But it's the plan. You make it feel so simple. You make it feel like it's so much grace. You can tell that is a big part of your mission, is the grace of it all. And so I want, if anyone listening, if you've been thinking about it and you've been looking for just the right blueprint, the right plan that felt aligned with you and how your body works, that gives you that grace, that really dives into, how to make it work for you. This is the book. This is the book I want to get your hands on. And so, Cynthia, honey, where do you want us to go to not only get the book, to get all the goodies, goodies that you've got, that you have put together to just really make this so easy for us?
Yeah, I would say probably the best place to start is my website. So www.cynthiathurlow.com. And it gives you the opportunity. You can choose the vendor if you want to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, or your local bookstore. And I do encourage people to, give your business to your local bookstore if you still have one around, because they really have struggled the last 2 years. And there you will find lots of amazing resources. What I love is that one of the book bonuses, one of my favorites, is that the woman who wrote the recipes for the book, Beth Lipton, who I think is absolutely brilliant and so aligned with, my kind of gluten, dairy-free philosophy for women overall, she supplied additional recipes that are part of, the book bonus. And so you get that, as well as, there's a webinar that we're actually doing tonight. And then there are other bonuses that will be available to your listeners. But I'm really excited. And this has been such a passion project. Anyone that knows me knows that anything I do is really with service and intention, that this is a book that's so needed. We can't fast like men, and we shouldn't have to apologize for it. Let's lean into our physiology and feel inspired and empowered to live our best lives and not feel confused. It's interesting. I'm the kind of person that I genuinely do interact on social media. It's not just my team. And some of the feedback that we were getting from other podcasts that I participated in, women just felt like really validated and heard. They're like, wow, like no one has talked about fasting in this way and is allowing me to see it from a whole different perspective. So I get to join other colleagues that are doing great work in this space. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to connect with you and your listeners.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, and so excited for the release of this book. By the time this goes out, it will be available. So we'll steer everyone in that direction. And yeah, like I said, it's such a great, complete manual for leveraging our greatest asset. And that's our cycle. And then what that looks as as we enter every single phase. And I mean, I think it's our superpower.
Yeah,
You know
absolutely.
what I'm saying?
Well,
And
instead of feeling like we have to apologize for it, I mean, how many times throughout our lifetime have we been made to feel like we have to apologize because we get a menstrual cycle? It's really unfortunate, because I look at this so differently now than I did when I was a newbie nurse or a new nurse practitioner. And I'm like, gosh, there's information in this book I wish I had in my 20s and 30s. I think it would have made a huge difference. It certainly would have made a hell of a difference in perimenopause. So on a lot of levels, I think that this book will resonate with women, whatever life stage they're in.
I agree. Wait, Cynthia, honey, I have some quick fire questions
Yep.
that I keep forgetting about. My audience is probably like, sometimes she doesn't and sometimes she doesn't. What is up with that? So do you mind if we do them real quick?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So let's, the first one is, what is one thing you are deeply grateful for right now?
You know, I feel a lot of love and connection from people throughout my lifetime. So not just my childhood best friends, my family, college, post-college, graduate school, my entrepreneurial friends. I just feel deeply indebted and grateful for the love and support I feel right now.
I love that. Well, you got our support over here, girl. So proud of you and this incredible masterpiece of a book that you've written. What was something you've done that made you feel extremely happy in the last week?
Oh, goodness. You know, it's funny. I went to a really hot yoga class, and for anyone that knows me, yoga is something I need to do, but it requires me to put forth a lot of effort because it's not my natural inclination to, like, you know, gear down. And so I found a yoga studio that has really hot yoga, but it's yin. And so for me to quiet my mind and sit in a hot yoga class, it makes me feel like a badass. Like I feel so good when I leave. And then I'm actually so focused on how much I'm sweating that I don't think about how hot I am. I mean, it's really an interesting dichotomy. So I would say it's definitely the yoga because it's what I need to do for me.
I love that. I have the same relationship with yoga. I'm
Yep.
like, I could do a strength training class in 30 minutes. That would feel more better for me. And I'm like, girl, you need yoga, be honest.
Exactly.
I love that. What's one thing about you that surprises people?
Oh, I think people are surprised to know I'm an introvert. Like I am really an introvert. Like I could be alone in a room. Yeah. Alone in a room with a book and be totally happy. And so for me, during like a book launch, as you can imagine, it's like finding balance during my day. So it's creating little rituals for me to kind of like, you know, kind of go back into my introverted self and then be ready to, you know, appear to be an extrovert. I always say like I'm an introverted extrovert. I have this sense of like my public persona where people assume I'm an extrovert. I'm not. I'm actually very much an introvert.
You just know how to turn it on.
Yes, exactly. I work it to my advantage.
What is a book or a film that you had recently consumed that had a big impact on you, and why?
I would say two. I recently read Breath by James Nestor for the second time prior to interviewing him for the podcast. And I got more out of it the second time than I did on the first. And what really kind of blew my mind. And remember, like my whole background's critical care, cardiology, ER medicine, how simple breathing can be, but yet we make it so difficult. We really make it so difficult. The other book that I read most recently that really made a huge impression on me was Drop Acid. So Perlmutter's book, which I read before I interviewed him. And everything I knew about uric acid got blown out of the water. So it completely like blew my mind from a kind of physiology perspective, like looking at uric acid as a metabolic health marker. That's really the big takeaway. So if you want to be metabolically flexible, knowing what your numbers are, I would say those are probably, and I don't read a lot of fiction. So admittedly, I'm reading a lot of books for my business or in my business or interviewing people, but those two in particular really stood out. Like they just completely flipped everything I knew, flipped it around. And that's the best way to be, like being a lifelong learner and just saying like, wow, like what I learned before, it doesn't hold up in light of what I'm reading here.
Those are two. I read those as well. They're phenomenal. I
They
totally
are.
recommend them. And then the last question, this is what actually prompted me to remember, because you had said something and I was like, oh, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Oh God, I would have said, stop putting so much pressure on yourself. I think I was so like, I was unusual. This probably won't surprise you, but I was unusual that at 18, I was very clear about my path. Like, I'm going to go to college for this. I'm going to go to law school. This is the kind of law I'm going to practice. I would have just allowed myself to experience more and not be so rigid. Like I was definitely like very tunnel vision. These are the classes I need to take to make my application enticing for a law school. And it then took me not going to law school, taking a couple of years out of college to go back and take pre-med classes. And I think if I had allowed myself the ability to be less rigid, I probably would have figured that all out sooner, but it all makes sense now. So I would say like stress, like just enjoy being 18 years old and having no responsibility and stop being so rigid. That's probably what I would tell myself.
Yeah, that was my big aha moment as
Mm-hmm.
well. Well, thank you. We did it. Thank you
Yes,
so
we
much
did.
for coming on. And I'm super excited for you. Congratulations again.
Thank you so much.